All right, folks, so in our last presentation, we talked about what Buddhism is, the major sacred texts, and we talked about the life of Siddhartha Gautama, the founder of the Buddhist religion. So let's now talk about the three major Buddhist teachings. So the first teaching basically encapsulates the Buddhist worldview in kind of a nutshell as far as the purpose of human life. So the ultimate goal of human life is to achieve enlightenment, nirvana, and parinirvana through studying the teachings of Buddha or Dharma and living a holy life and practicing right meditation techniques. So in other words, there is a threefold goal in Buddhism: to achieve enlightenment, nirvana, and parinirvana. So what do these terms mean? So to achieve enlightenment means that one attains a complete understanding of the nature of the world and oneself. So one comes to realize universal truth of basically how the world works. Nirvana is an absolute state of mental calm where the mind is untroubled by thoughts of anger, frustration, and sadness. And in Pali Sanskrit, to attain nirvana means to literally blow like a calm wind. So in other words, when one achieves enlightenment, they also experience nirvana, which is to experience this kind of calm, serene, peaceful mind, which is untroubled by thoughts of like anger, frustration, disappointment, etc. And the third goal of Buddhism is to achieve parinirvana, which is the final release of the mind or consciousness from samsara. So it's kind of like the Buddhist form of moksha. And parinirvana means final peace, which means never to be born again in samsara. So again, the job of a Buddhist is to achieve enlightenment, to realize universal truth, to achieve this kind of calm, serene mind, and the final kind of goal is to get off of the wheel of birth and death. Now, in terms of parinirvana, you might be saying to yourself, wow, well, that actually sounds a lot like Hinduism, right? It sounds like moksha. However, unlike Hinduism, Buddha argued against the existence of Atman and Brahman. So for Buddha, there is no supreme being or creator God, and human beings don't have a soul or Atman, and they don't even have an ego. Like there's nothing about us which is eternal and unchanging. Thus, in the Buddhist tradition, living beings do not have an Atman, they don't have a soul. Rather, they possess mind or consciousness, and this mind or consciousness is always in a state of flux and change. And because there is no creator God, the Buddhist worldview is that the universe was never created, that we can just go back in time to infinity. And so in this respect, Buddhism is very different from Hinduism because there is no supreme creator God, and there is no Atman or soul. So a question that I often get from students is, okay, so what happens when a being achieves parinirvana? Like, where does the mind go? Well, this is actually something that is debated within the Buddhist community, and we can't really get into it now, but if you have questions, just, let me know and we'll talk about it. All right, the second teaching. The second teaching is that the truth of the world is comprised of the Four Noble Truths. So this kind of encapsulates what the nature of the world and the nature of the human condition is. So the Four Noble Truths would be life is suffering, or dukkha. The cause of suffering is attachment, or tanha. The solution to suffering is non-attachment, or araga. And the path of non-attachment is the Noble Eightfold Path. So let's just kind of break these down. All right, so the first noble truth, life is suffering. So what does it mean that life is suffering? Well, in the Buddhist tradition, it's this idea that all living beings are caught in the wheel of samsara. Thus, all living beings experience birth, death, and rebirth for a potentially infinite number of times. So in other words, all beings are caught in this wheel of samsara of, birth, illness, old age, and death. And they go through it an potentially infinite number of times, and this is the condition of living beings, and it is one of suffering, right? Of just continual birth and death. So dukkha, or life is suffering, is the way I look at it is just kind of like Buddha's way of saying, okay, well, this is the reality of life. But samsara is not exactly the cause of suffering, right? It's just the reality of life. So what is the cause of suffering? Well, the cause of suffering is attachment, or tanha. That is, to try to alleviate kind of the suffering or the feelings of misery in this world, living beings become attached to impermanent things which eventually decay and die. So whether they be BMWs or your spouse or your cat, at some point all these things are going to leave us. So what is the result of attachment? Anger, frustration, sadness, disappointment, despair. For any of those who may have had a car and then had to get rid of the car, remember the sadness you felt, the disappointment that you and your car couldn't be together forever. So when people attach themselves to things and those things leave them, uh, these are kind of like the mental defilements that result. The third noble truth is the solution to suffering. So the solution to suffering is non-attachment. To let go of these physical and mental attachments by studying Buddhist teachings and engaging in right meditation techniques. So there's this idea that if you engage in certain meditation techniques, you can gradually let go of your attachments and mental defilements. And the name of this path of non-attachment is the Noble Eightfold Path. And as you can see from this diagram, it's broken into like three major kind of divisions. The division of wisdom, so the idea is if you want to become non-attached, of course Buddhists probably wouldn't like me saying want to become attached, but we can talk about that later. One has to first understand how the world really works through the teachings of Buddha. One also has to live an ethical life by practicing those particular practices. And one also has to engage in the right meditation techniques, or division of mental discipline. And it's only when one practices the Noble Eightfold Path that they can attain enlightenment and that serene, peaceful mind, as well as achieve parinirvana. And lastly, Buddhists should dedicate their lives to the Sangha, or religious community of monks, nuns, and lay people. So all Buddhists, whether they are a monk, a nun, or a lay person, they are to dedicate themselves to this kind of community of Buddhists. And one of the responsibilities of being part of the Sangha is you must follow what are referred to as the 5 basic precepts of Buddhism, which is to abstain from killing things, abstain from stealing, abstain from sexual misconduct, false speech, and intoxicating substances. Now, the principle that is going to be the most important for us is actually the first precept of nonviolence. And just to be aware that there are some key words that you have to know that are related to this first precept, such as ahimsa, which is nonviolence, metta, which is acts of loving kindness, and karuna, which is compassion.